the Washington County Board of Education work session for this afternoon. Members are here this afternoon to review the board's operating norms and communication processes. This is a work session, and in a work session, we're able to discuss and do an in-depth examination of policies, programs, and other items of information. There'll be no formal action taken this afternoon. At some future date, there will be a vote to accept the norms and communication processes. And at that time, the full board will be in place at a business meeting to take that formal action. This afternoon, we have Mrs. Murray with us, Mr. Gesford, Mr. Stauffer, and myself. And what I would like us to do first is to look at the operating norms. Everyone have that sheet? Mrs. Chekovich is going to be taking any suggested changes via the computer. Our operating norms begin with the statement, operating norms should be reviewed and or revised by the full board at least at each reorganization following an election. As board members, we pledge to. So at this time, we'll begin discussion.
Perhaps you might want to explain why we're doing it so late in the year, since reorganization was last December.
Well, we had a lot on our plate that we were dealing with, and this has really been what I think is a reasonable opportunity to look at these norms and operating procedures. Okay? All right. So at our board retreat, we had the opportunity to, as a board, to review our norms. And at that time, we discussed the possibility of looking at the first norm. And I believe the conversation was that we agreed with it in theory, but perhaps we needed some future discussion. Yes, Mr. Stauffer.
I just changed that this way, that we should make decisions that are in the best interest of students.
Okay. So your suggestion is to make decisions that are in the best interest of students?
Yes.
Anyone else want to weigh in on that?
I think that sounds like we're putting students first and not just their achievement, putting themselves and not just looking at their achievement. That's part of it. Achievement is part of it, but
I'm fine with that.
Okay. All right. Number 2. From my notes, in retreat, we had affirmed that. Do we want to?
I made one change to it. I took number 10, maintain quality. Respect others by listening to all points of view, openly and honestly.
I'm fine with that. Mr. Gessler?
I'm fine with that change.
Okay, so we're going to add, and maintaining confidentiality and eliminating then number 10, because we've incorporated it.
Yes.
Ms. Murray, Mr. Gessert, are you good with that?
Yes, that's fine.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. All right, number 3. My notes say that we discuss maintaining the intent, but rephrasing it.
Well, again, I'll suggest something if you'd like. I just put that members shall be punctual for BOE meetings and let it go at that.
Again, Mr. Stauffer, please.
Members shall be punctual for BOE meetings, Board of Education meetings. Excuse me.
Is it possible that we can add something to let leadership know if we're not going to be there on time, so that that could be directed, and at least maybe in the past where we've been waiting for someone, and if we've known that in the past, that we could have just either stopped the meeting because we know someone's on their way, or we just know to go ahead on with the meeting. So maybe just letting everybody know, at least leadership, that you're going to be late, just so that there's no question. Is there some way that we could add that to that?
Members will notify. You want notify board leadership
I think board leadership's good.
of
Of absence or delay.
Okay, of absence or delay. You good with that language, or?
Yeah, something along those lines.
Part members shall be,
Punctual. Members shall be punctual for BOE meetings. Members will notify board leadership of absence or delay.
Type of attendance, so that we are not waiting.
Okay? Are we all right with that? Number 4, come prepared to all meetings and ask relevant questions that add value to the decision-making process.
Was that affirmed?
Go ahead, Mike.
Was that affirmed?
What I have in my note says it needs more discussion and rephrasing.
I simplified it. I put, be prepared for participation in the collective decision-making process.
Repeat that one more time.
I just simplified it and said, be prepared for participation in the collective decision-making process.
I like that better.
Once more to make sure Ms. Chekovic has it.
I stated it as be prepared for participation in the collective decision-making process. Idea that, we make decisions as a board, not as individuals. I think we can do away with the word relevant, because I think all questions are relevant. They just might be for clarification, or someone might not be as knowledgeable about a certain aspect of something as another member on the board, and you need to ask questions. I mean, for those of us that were teachers, we used to tell students there's no such thing as a silly question. If you don't know, ask. Why should it be any different up here?
Okay. Mr. Gessert, are you all right with that one?
I'm fine with that.
Mrs. Murray?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. 5, 6, and 7. 5 is adhere to board communication processes. 6 is share ideas and information, and 7 is seek consensus and honor the majority decision.
We affirmed all of those
We did.
in that retreat.
Is there anything that needs to change in any of those?
I don't believe so.
Okay.
So,
All right. Number 8. Contact colleagues personally to discuss or resolve an issue.
and we said that that conflicted with the
Communication
communication
process.
process. So my suggestion would be either to delete it, or I offer this language: differing opinions should be discussed collectively in order to seek resolution.
Differing opinions should be,
Discussed collectively in order to seek resolution. In other words, I'm thinking express your issues, differing opinions, complaints, in collective body, so that everyone knows what's going on out there. But as we did say, it interferes with the communication process, one of the aspects of that. That's why it needed modified, needs future discussion.
I'm fine with that. I'm fine with that wording.
I'm good.
Mrs. Murray,
Yes, I'm fine with that, thank you.
do you have that, Ms. Chikovic? And we're good with 6 and 7 there. Share ideas and information, seek consensus, and honor the majority decision.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, so we've eliminated main confidentiality because we've incorporated that in 2. That brings us to 11, observe Robert's.
Nine.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Fine.
I'm sorry. Thank you for keeping me straight. Number 9, not challenge colleagues on their vote after a debate has been held and a vote taken. And my notes say that we were thinking about combining this with another norm.
Yes. And probably, I don't know, maybe
7, seek consensus and honor the majority decision.
could go there. Could be included in number 2 also. But we could do it in number 7. That would be a good place for it.
I would definitely like to see the words "not challenged" removed and add respect colleagues. And
All right,
That
respect
is a much
colleagues.
better word. It's much more positive.
Respect colleagues on their vote.
yes.
Or how about just respect colleagues' votes?
Okay. We respect colleagues, and we'll need an apostrophe after colleagues. Respect colleagues' vote after a debate has been held and a vote taken. And we want to incorporate that, or just we want to let that stand as number 9?
Excuse me.
I would let it stand as number.
Either way.
Let it stand as number 9. Respect colleagues' vote after a debate has been held and a vote taken.
Respect colleagues' vote or votes?
Votes.
Well, plural, so it should vote.
Votes. Mhm. Mhm. Respect colleagues' votes after a debate has been held and a vote taken. Good with that? Okay.
I'm good.
Okay, number 11, observe Robert's Rules of Order. And then in parentheses, training and Robert's Rules of Order will be provided upon request.
But haven't we said that Robert's Rules of Order is just a guideline for us? So I changed that to Robert's Rules of Order will be used as a guidance. I don't know if that's the way we want to phrase that for conducting meetings.
Will be used as guidance in conducting meetings.
Yes, that's what I wrote, but I don't know if that's,
I think that's in keeping with policy. I think policy is written
yeah.
We want to get a
so that it's
clarification
used as
from
a
legal.
guideline.
Want
Mr.
clear-
Trotta, is that not the way it's mentioned in policy?
BEDD policy? DD.
So if we strike observe and have the sentence begin, Robert's Rules of Order, Robert's Rules of Order will be used as guidance in conducting meetings? Does that capture what we want?
I think it does.
What about what's in parentheses about training? Do we want that to stand? What do we have that would stand for training upon request? If a board member said, I would like to have training in Robert's rules, what would we, how would we make that happen?
Yeah, we might check with MABE and see if they had something to offer. I'm certain we could put something together from our social studies department, probably. There's all types of general guides to Robert's Rules of Order, all the way to the true Robert's Rules of Order and Robert's Rules of Order for dummies and things like that. Even, I mean, there's books like that that
Right.
help describe it in the most simplistic form. There's a one-sheet document that we used 25, 30 years ago when we would do parliamentary procedure, and it was complicated, but all the information was on one sheet. What motion trumped another motion, what order you had to go in, what required a second, what was majority vote, what was 2/3 of a vote, all types of things. I mean, it's quite a process.
Okay,
So I think using Robert's Rules of Order as a guideline is a good one.
okay. Oh, I do too.
I got this from you, Matt.
But do we need to put in there according to policy? And then,
We could.
just name the policy BDEE?
Yes. And Madam President, Steve Bounds of MABE has graciously offered at any time to offer a presentation to the board members and staff on Robert's Rules.
So that could be done in a work session or a training session?
Either approach.
Upon request of Mr. Bounds?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, great. So to address Mr. Gessler's suggestion, do we want to note that just,
Can we just
do
put
we
in
say
there
in accordance with policy?
according to policy? Yeah, accordance to policy, in accordance to policy.
In accordance with policy BDD, is that it?
EE.
BDE,
BEBEDD.
BEDD, bed with two Ds. Okay. All right, here's what I have. In accordance with policy BEDD, Robert's Rules of Order will be used as guidance in conducting meetings. Does that say what we wanted to say?
I thought we were going to put Robert's Rules of Order will be used as, and then, does it make a difference?
You want it at the end and not as a
Addressing Robert's
introduct-
Rules in the beginning, so. would that
Robert's
be-
Rules of Order will be used in guidance in conducting meetings in accordance with policy BED. You'd like to see it at the end as opposed to at the front.
I don't know, you're addressing the,
What, in accordance with, yeah, at the end.
Okay. Ms. Chekovic, can you make that happen? Can you move the phrase "in accordance with policy BEDD" to the end of that statement after the word "meetings"? So the sentence begins, Robert's Rules of Order. And number 12, limit use of electronic devices during board meetings to business use.
but did we say that was we were gonna adhere to it, or are we gonna change it?
Said we
Um,
would revisit it.
We said we would revisit it.
I don't have any issue with it.
Mr. Stauffer?
Well, quite frankly, I know that on a previous board, that caused some controversy, I believe. There was a committee of communication set up, three-person panel, and I think that caused some friction, I'll say it that way. But I have no problem with it. I don't think, you just, you know, you just shouldn't be on your cell phone during the meeting, quite frankly.
So no change in that wording?
No,
That's what
because
I'm
limit
hearing.
use, that, you know, if you had an emergency, that's,
Do you have a suggestion that you'd like to see?
No,
Step out of the meeting, step away from the meeting,
no,
take the phone
I'm
call somewhere else?
fine with it as is.
case it, something in case. Thought you could hear me. I said I think emergencies would be extenuating circumstances that we'd all accept. It wouldn't have to be in policy, because it doesn't happen that often.
So we want to add to business use and emergencies?
I think what I was saying was because emergencies don't arise that often, I'm not sure it has to be in the policy.
Okay.
So just leave it the way it is?
Yes, that was my
Okay.
thought.
Mr. Stauffer? As is?
As is, for me.
As is?
Yes, ma'am.
What I'd like to do is to read down what I have, and if there's anything different, then I'll give Mrs. Chekovic an opportunity to. Okay, there's no change to the opening statement or to the phrase, "As board members, we pledge to." Number 1, make decisions that are in the best interest of students. Number 2, respect others by listening to all points of view and communicating openly and honestly and maintaining confidentiality.
I think we want to take that one "and" out, that after maintaining,
Yeah,
after points of view, I'm sorry.
yeah, that
Okay.
comes out.
Okay.
Respect others by listening to all points of view, comma,
Right.
communicating openly and honestly, comma, and maintaining confidentiality. Am I correct?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay. Number 3, members shall be punctual for BOE meetings, or Board of Education meetings, period, members will notify board leadership of absence or delay.
Say that again, the last part.
Members will notify board leadership of absence or delay.
How about just combine that with a sentence and say, and notify board leadership of absence or delay?
Members shall be punctual for Board of Education meetings and will notify board leadership of absence or delay. Okay, one sentence. Mr. Gesser, are you good with that?
I'm fine with that.
Okay.
Thank you.
Number 4, be prepared for participation in the collective decision-making process. Number 5, remains as is, adhere to board communication processes. Number 6, remains as is, share ideas and information. Number 7, remains as is, seek consensus and honor the majority decision. Number 8, differing opinions should be discussed collectively in order to seek resolution. Yes?
Yeah.
I'm looking for some.
Yes,
Yes,
yes.
Okay,
I'm
I'm-
sorry.
I'm, I'm
Yeah.
thinking that if I'm not correct, that you're going to say, "Oh, no, 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 okay, all right." I don't want to assume. Number 9, respect colleagues' votes after a debate has been held and a vote taken.
I'm good.
Yes.
Okay. And number 10,
Comes Robert's Rules of Order.
Robert's Rules of Order will be used as guidance in conducting meetings in accordance with policy BEDD. And in parentheses, training in Robert's Rules of Order will be provided upon request.
Just hold up a second. We need to get that. It starts out with Robert's Rules of Order, and Debbie's trying to type it. Give her some time to catch up. You good? Yeah, she's good.
Okay. And then number 11 would be limit use of electronic devices during board meetings to business use.
I'm good.
Okay.
And we had three things, discuss possible norms. In there.
Now, recognizing that we have 3 board members who aren't here, it's very possible that they would have had suggestions, and I don't know that those possible norms mentioned in these notes
Well, I think the third bullet.
originated with any of us, so
I
that
think
this
the third
is,
bullet originated with Mr. Gesser,
okay.
I think. If I remember correctly.
Okay, do you recall? Would you like some think time with it?
I'm pretty sure you did up in the retreat.
I'm sorry, I didn't.
Yeah, you were looking something on the lines of that.
Celebratory.
You were intrigued by the one statement in one of the other county things in the booklet that we had at the retreat from St. Mary's County, their last bullet. Have fun and celebrate accomplishments to ensure that all decisions are made in the best interest of students. That's where I borrowed the
Right.
best interest of students, but you were intrigued by that phrase, have fun and celebrate accomplishments, I remember.
Yeah. Kind of ends it on a positive note, instead of of always just having a negative tone, you know, you need to celebrate. So that's right. And I'm sorry, I did not take that note and bring it with me, but
Could we
and
hear
I
that
think that
again?
actually was, I think that was taken from a couple different ones.
I think
It wasn't just
something similar appeared in
Right.
several sets
Board
of norms
norms.
from other counties
Right.
in the state.
Yeah, but that was one,
Pretty representative, I think, of what's in the other.
that
part.
was one place that,
Could we hear that again, please?
yeah, out of the St. Mary's County norms. Let me get the page again. Their last bullet was have fun and celebrate accomplishments to ensure that all decisions are made in the best interest of students.
Have fun and celebrate.
I don't particularly like the phrase
accomplishments.
have fun, I mean, but
Celebrate accomplishments.
something more, something positive type of phrase. I'm not sure just
it could
what it
just
could be.
be celebrate accomplishments.
Could it be recognized and celebrate accomplishments?
That's what I was
There
thinking.
you go.
Recognize and celebrate accomplishments.
I think that's something that you're doing as a
Try to,
superintendent
but
throughout
I mean, the board members see lots of things that I don't see, so I
Right.
appreciate when you bring them up.
So the suggestion is recognize and celebrate accomplishments.
Possible number 12 then, right?
Yes. Mm-hmm. And then the other references, my notes reference something about expanding knowledge, see Baltimore County example.
Well, yeah,
Yeah.
that's where it came from. Their last bullet, we will continually strive to expand our knowledge of public education and skills and governance through conferences, workshops, seminars, books and publications, retreats. But someone was intrigued with that, that's why it ended up there as possible discussion item.
Have strong feelings about adding that? Parts of that?
Parts of it, too.
Well, you could just use it and say, we will, as board members, we pledge to continually strive to expand our knowledge of public education and skills in governance, and let it go at that without listing specific ways to do it, but that's just a suggestion, if
So-
you want to do that.
So to fit with the stem that we have at the top as board members, we pledge to, we would need to start with a verb. That verb could be
Okay, then
strive,
just strive, drop it continually.
Support or expand, strive.
strive to
Or you could just start with expand, as Mike says.
expand.
Try to expand, because the two's already there, our knowledge of.
So what's your pleasure? We do starting with strive to or expand our,
I'd just go with expand.
okay. Keep going. Help wordsmith
Expand our
this.
knowledge of public education
Expand our knowledge
and skills in governance, and you want to
of public education.
borrow their language, or
Expand our knowledge of public education and
skills in governance,
skills
in governance,
in governance.
just borrow their thing.
Expand our knowledge of public education and skills in governance. And we're not going to say how, just that that is something that we pledge to do.
Well, we did something. Teachers typically do but how you're going to do it.
Maybe something like provide, through a variety of professional development opportunities, activities, something like that.
Yeah, we have a wordsmith sitting right here at the table.
Through a variety of professional development opportunities.
And I see, even reading books, articles, conferences, collaborative efforts, all those things as professional development opportunities.
Right. So what I have, expand our knowledge of public education and skills in governance through a variety of professional development opportunities and trainings.
Everybody's watching for it to come up on the screen.
Oh.
I think, Debbie, they want to start with expand. Start with the word expand.
Yeah, that phrase as, yeah, there we go.
That's good.
Okay,
That's good.
I like that. I like it.
That's good.
okay.
Good.
Now, the other that we had here was ethics, and I really do not recall. And perhaps that originated with Mr. Bickford or Mrs. Fisher, and that's something that could be addressed at the
Because
business meeting when we
Ethics to me includes a
have
lot of,
these as an action
ethics to
item.
me includes a lot of different things, which I won't go into, but there are various aspects of that. Perhaps that's best left for discussion on another day, since we have 3 members not present.
Is it possible to have those up so that we can see what we have from top to bottom? Sure that that's what we want moving forward. Are we satisfied that we've addressed
I'm good.
these to Mrs. Merritt?
Yes.
I'm satisfied.
Okay, so that brings us then to communication processes, which is a much lengthier and more involved document. Section A deals with communication with concerned individuals. There are 6 statements in Section A. My notes say that we had said that we would like to take a look at Statement 1, Statement 2, Statement 4 in that section. That doesn't mean that we can't look at the others, but those are the 3 that we
Well,
wanted to revisit.
on the others, there was pretty much consensus on that they were okay. But yeah, it says for number 1, maintain intent but clarify. So I don't recall what it was that we wanted to clarify. I'm not sure if that was from one of the other members or what.
Item 1, or Statement 1, says that board members should refer the issue to the superintendent or ombudsman, who will, to the extent that is possible, maintain confidentiality. Do we have, in fact, an ombudsman, or is that something that?
I think we've transferred those responsibilities to Richard Wright as kind of the person of contact. I think we even have some documents that might even refer to him as ombudsman. I maybe need to confirm that with Richard, but I know that's where everything goes, that gets called into the ombudsman desk.
So is that what we wanted to say, or do we want it to say that the issue should be referred to the superintendent?
Well, depends what the issue is. I mean, if it's concerning a school, I know when I was the athletic director at Williamsport, we always, when a parent called with a complaint or a concern, my first question was, have you talked to the coach? And if not, that was the starting point, and then it went up the ladder.
And I think this addresses that. It says that board members should refer the individual to the staff person closest to the problem. But if they're reluctant to contact those people closest to the problem, they should refer the issue to the superintendent or the ombudsman.
Mm,
I think.
Well, it sounds like it addresses the issue and then it goes to the superintendent or the ombudsman who will. So, I mean, it seems to me that it's already addressed. I mean, I think, and it needs to go in that order. Superintendent should be the person, and then if it can't get through, then we need to address it to the ombudsman. But do we have someone that's neutral outside of the system that could be the ombudsman? Is
Well, in the past, Shula Finkelstein was our ombudsman. I mean, her role, kind of as liaison for Dr. Morgan, she created that role. Shula, a lot of times, would just help people work through the problem, get them to the right person, and/or get it up to Dr. Morgan if that was appropriate for her to deal with it. I think the concept, the way I'm reading this language here, if somebody's reluctant to go to the principal because, or teacher, whoever it is, they're concerned about retaliation's the word I think that's used, they can pass it on, and to the best of our ability, we'll keep it confidential. Sometimes that's not always possible. You know, if it's a specific complaint or concern about somebody, in some ways, under contract, we have a responsibility to share things with people. And in other ways, there's no way to deal with it without talking to somebody. So,
But to me, I think of an ombudsman, somebody who is very neutral, that has no connection to either. Because in the health field, you have an ombudsman who is not in the nursing home that will advocate for that patient and advocate for the administration from both sides. If you have somebody that's in the organization, it really is kind of still that one-sided, tilt, and that's for me. So for me, I see as an ombudsman as somebody that's totally neutral in the person that they can go to, and then that person can direct it to the principal or to the superintendent.
yeah,
That's
again,
my opinion.
yeah, and I can appreciate that's how it is in the field. I think Shula's role was not to be a decision maker at all. She played no role in right or wrong. Her thing was just coordinating how to get the person in contact with the right person, how to help explain a policy or procedure, where you might find it, where you might seek help, and/or direct it to the superintendent was kind of her role, as I recall. It's been a long time ago. I mean, I'm not even sure we didn't have a policy on the ombudsman, I'm not sure. But we definitely had a description of what the ombudsman did and what their role was. And it was similar to what you're describing, Mr. Gussert. It was not a decision-making, but not necessarily completely neutral, more of a guiding person that can help you find information or get the information you needed or seek the resolution that you were trying to find out.
The last sentence in number 1, the superintendent will be the sole point of contact for board members. That says to me that should a board member be contacted by an individual with a concern, that the board member will contact the superintendent, not a principal, not a director, not a supervisor, but the superintendent with that concern.
Right. The way I read this one, if you're trying to help somebody, it's kind of like Mr. Stauffer said, have you talked to the coach yet? Have you talked to the teacher? Have you talked to the principal? That would be your guidance to them if you wanted to offer that. If you weren't sure who to direct them to, certainly to Richard might be a contact, or you could direct them to my office. But if you're going to call somebody on staff, your call's not to the principal or to the coach or to whoever, your call is to me.
You don't think you said you didn't think there was a policy that addresses the ombudsman?
I'm wondering if there is. I'd have to refer to Tony, and I don't know if he could ask Jamie to check real quick. Seems like I'm remember. I know we had things in writing, but again, kind of as that role phased out, the duties of if you contacted that help information kind of went to Richard. But I don't think we've advertised an ombudsman-like role very much.
We certainly can provide that information to the board. There is a provision, if a citizen has a concern related to fraud or something of that nature, there is a policy that the ombudsman is the point of contact for the citizen to lodge that concern, and there is a hotline that's in place. But we certainly can provide that information to the board.
So no changes to statement 1. Okay, number 2. Board members should not compromise any quasi-judicial role by listening to the details of the concern. They should limit the response and feedback. And in parentheses, staff is responsible for responding. And my note says, I think the question was about a general concern, listening to the details of a general concern as opposed to a concern that could end up in an appeal.
Yeah, this is
Is that-
something that Mr. Trotta said we have to be careful about, if I recall the conversation.
We understand that from time to time, the board members may be approached by members of the community and employees about particular concerns. And the great unknown is whether at some point in time a decision will be made that ultimately will be presented to the Board of Education for adjudication. The board members play a number of roles, but they also play a quasi-judicial role, and that is that under Maryland law, there are many things that can be appealed to the superintendent, and if an individual is not satisfied with that decision, they can then appeal to the board. So there's always a concern that if someone were to approach you and you got very involved in a discussion and offer to do some follow-up, that it might compromise your ability in the future, should there be a matter presented to the board in its capacity as a quasi-judicial body. And the example I always give, if you could imagine yourself being in a courtroom and you observe the other party, which is inappropriate, talk privately to the judge, you would feel perhaps that it wasn't really a fair process. And attorneys are not permitted to engage in what they refer to as ex parte communications with a judge. So it's the same standard for board members. You must maintain that impartiality, and you can never give the appearance somehow that you are aware of the facts or have already made a decision on a matter that's never been presented to you.
Thank you. So we're fine with that language?
I'm fine with that.
I'm fine with it.
All right, number 4, issues that are not operational should be referred to the appropriate standing committee, in parentheses, policy, curriculum, facilities, finance, and human resources, after consultation with the superintendent. The board member will explain the committee process while not promising action. I did, because I thought we were just looking at the ones that we wanted to.
Okay.
But we can certainly
clarify it.
go back to 3.
So we can just make sure everyone knows that we're skipping it for a reason.
Uh-huh. But we can look at 3, 5, and 6. For 4, I have in my note, clarify. So, issues that are not operational could be referred to the appropriate standing committee. So I'm trying to think what issues they might be that would arise from a call or an email from a concerned citizen, a concerned individual.
I would
Yeah.
think that everything would go through the superintendent.
Mhm.
Well, it says it goes through the superintendent to begin with, so
Right.
I think stands alone. That's what the,
As it says up
Procedure
there,
would
the
be.
superintendent will be the sole point of contact for board members.
right.
Madam President, in essence, the day-to-day operational matters fall under the jurisdiction of the superintendent. And under Maryland law, boards of education are permitted or authorized to adopt policy. So that's the one area where I do see it as, it's actually a shared responsibility between the board and the superintendent. And so those might be situations in particular where it would be referred to a board committee where it's a pure policy determination.
I'm going to make that notation.
Phrase we're going to use.
Mr. Trotta, is there anything that you think we could change in number 4 to clarify that, or do you think it's pretty clear?
I think if the board believes there's some need for clarity, perhaps we could define the word operational, if you think that would be helpful, provide some
To define
terminology.
the word operational? Which would be the day-to-day running of the school system.
Day-to-day management operation of the school system can provide a more thorough definition.
Okay. Day-to-day management. Okay, so to provide a definition. Okay, anything else in section A? You want to look at 3, 5, or 6? All right.
No, because we had pretty much affirmed those with the 6 of the members of the board at the retreat that are okay with those things.
All right, we'll move on then to section B, communications and board meetings. Looking at my notes, we have just 2 that we wanted to look at again. One was number 2, and the other, number 3. Does anyone have anything different in their notes? Number 2, board members should give their questions to staff in advance of all meetings whenever possible.
I think the discussion there was the fact that while we're discussing something, questions arise, and so you couldn't always give them in advance.
Personally, I think that covers it, whenever possible.
Whenever
Whenever
possible.
possible.
I mean, I think that includes the fact that something may come up in minutes or question when personnel being discussed, that we get a report and somebody wants to know some particular about that. I mean, you don't want to do that ahead of time because that means it goes into the email system and it's public knowledge, so.
And who's going to say that you didn't think of that right then? You know, so I mean, to say you're going to give the questions in advance, I mean, sometimes you don't have that question. It comes to your head, so someone's going to say, well, you should have gave that person a heads up on that question. Well, it just came
So,
through flirtation.
right, and in a situation where questions are asked in advance, whether it's a phone call or an email, those questions then don't always arise then again in a business meeting. Sometimes they do, sometimes they do. So is there a way?
Well, two thoughts I'd probably have on this. I'd certainly want to know the questions as well. You know, we have a presentation coming up on finances. I have no problem with the board members sending their questions to Jeff Prue or to David Brandenburg or Eric Sisler, but probably not expect a response back to them necessarily unless it's just, you know, straight out number or something. If it's like a detailed question, I'd want the opportunity to review their response, make sure I understood the question, other context of the question, and I would probably respond, or it would be, you know, someone would respond with my knowledge. So that's just one thought I had on that as I was kind of reading through there. But you're right, sometimes we provide responses and sometimes board members then are better informed. But if you feel like the public needs to know the answer to that question, we have no problem with you asking that question again publicly, even though you already know the answer. And I think we've done that in the past. You know, it's important for other, you know, if there's a question of mine, it might be a question for somebody else in the public. And you might even respond back to us if we do respond in advance, because it might be that we can't even get our response back to you until the day of the board meeting. We might even be prepared to respond at the table. But if it's something that you want the public to know, please ask the question again, and we'll respond with the same answer that we write back to you. So I think the fact, I guess my point is, the fact that we respond to you, don't feel like you know the answer now, you can still ask the same question in public. We'd be fine with that.
And I would be fine as a board member if a question was asked and you said, we don't have that answer right now, but we'll get back to you. I would respect the fact that you don't have the answer because I'm just asking you the question and you can't just come right off the cuff and give you the answer. I would respect not to have that happen.
Appreciate that.
Right.
Yep.
So, I mean, I'd give you the leadway if you give us a leadway.
And I think asking the question again in the board meeting leads to transparency, where a citizen watching might think, well, why didn't they ask this question? Don't they care about this, when in fact it's been asked and answered in an email or a phone conversation? So,
Well, and I know for me, sometimes asking questions of staff saves me some embarrassment. You know, it's like, oh, I was reading that
Right.
backwards, or I missed a word, it suddenly changed the whole context of things. So I think it's just part of our good partnership. You feel free to ask as many questions, whether you ask them in advance or at the table. The more complex they are, the more advance notice we have, the more we can make the presentation more coherent and understandable to the public and be responsive to the questions that you have.
so should we adjust this? Board members should give their questions to staff in advance, to say, should give their questions to the superintendent in advance?
I would probably be comfortable with that, and I would see that they got, you know, sent to the right people.
Okay,
Changing that to superintendent.
to the superintendent.
And I could see where your questions might be about one of your own committee meetings. I mean, but I'd still kind of like to know the questions.
Right.
And we've
So
always-
I'm suggesting.
We've always done it that way. I mean,
Yes, yes, I don't know that, yes. Board members should give their questions to the superintendent in advance of all meetings whenever possible. Does that say what we wanted to say?
Yes.
I did ask the question about the ombudsman to staff here a few minutes ago. I got a couple responses. The history of it went from Shula to Dr. Marco, from Dr. Marco to Richard Wright, Richard's only had one request as the ombudsman and has had no responses to the fraud hotline. So regardless of how that's used, it's not used very often.
Okay. All right, number 3, B3. At all board meetings, board members should ask questions at the end of each presentation, not during, unless there is a need to clarify an important or key point. This format may be changed with the consent of the board. Well, I think that's been a practice. I think that's usually the routine, is that the questions are held to the end. And
I think staff generally says either ask you in advance to hold your questions to the end, or sometimes there's presentations we'd prefer to have the questions as we go. So sometimes they'll ask you, if you have any questions, please don't hesitate to stop me, during the presentations. Other times they'll suggest to wait to the end. It's not like a standing norm of waiting to the end unless either the board agrees to ask or they're invited to ask would be appropriate. We really work hard, or try to work hard. When we put 10 minutes on the presentation, we try to make a 5 or 6 minute presentation, allow 3 or 4 or 5 minutes for questions, rather than a 10-minute presentation with 10 minutes of presentation and no time for questions. So we're trying to work on getting through the presentation. As it gets interrupted, sometimes the answer to the question's coming, or it appears staff has lengthened the presentation, and we're just trying to keep aware of your time and be respectful and things. But we got to do what works. So
right.
it's fine with us, whatever works.
Are we good with that language then? We're okay with that? Okay, and then I have no other notes with regard to the other 7. Are there any other?
Everybody was in agreement with them.
Okay. That brings us to C, requesting information and lines of communication. I have 2, 3, and 5 in my notes. 2, we wanted to revisit the wording, I believe. That we were happy with the intent, but individual requests for information should be made in writing or email to the superintendent and copied to all board members. If the superintendent determines the request will take more than 30 minutes of staff time to complete, the superintendent will refer the request to the full board for consensus before taking any action. Responses generated will be copied to all board members.
I think board members deserve all the information that they need to make decisions. And I've heard, I'll call them anecdotes, about why that was put in there in the past. I don't know if the anecdotes are true or not, but I've heard stories that was put in to try to stifle questions and the dissemination of information. Whether that's true or not, I don't know. But it may be that a board member like myself, less than a year in the position, I can't think of an issue where I would need that much in-depth information. That would take more than a half an hour to compile. We get a lot of information when we do in policy committee, when we writing policies from Mr. Prue and other individuals and stuff. But if the intent of that was to stifle the dissemination of information, if that were the case, then that was wrong. So if I'd leave the 30 minutes in there. I'd perhaps generalize the amount of time. But there are my thoughts on that.
I have a thought. Our Freedom of Information Act, if somebody asks for something, how much time do we allow them before we are billed? Is it 2 hours?
The law refers to search time, and it's a 2-hour limit for search time, and then any time after that, you can charge the cost of locating and producing the document.
So shouldn't we be consistent on our policy if we're going to do that for someone outside, that the board member should at least have the courtesy of that with the consent of the superintendent saying, if it does take a little longer, we would hope that you would understand and that we'll get to that as quickly as possible without delay, but, we just can't make it happen in 2 hours. I mean, I don't think anybody in this group has had an issue with that. I don't think we will. But, at least if you had that 2-hour, you're being consistent with somebody who's from the outside along with somebody from the inside. And that's just my thoughts.
Mr. Trotter, did I understand you to say that a board member could be charged for Freedom of Information Act?
That has been the past practice when it's exceeded a certain period of time, the 2 hours. I mean, that has, on occasion.
State law?
That is state law, but what I would share with you is that when it comes to requests for information, we've seen an ebb and a flow. And so right now, we're not seeing any volume at all, but there have been points in time where we could have hired a part-time person just to process requests for information. And so I think that was part of the thought. And of course, this is the board's communication processes, so the board is at liberty to modify the time period that's in here. But I think that was part also of the reasoning for placing this in this particular communication processes, which is a board document. This is not a staff document. So you're at liberty to modify it.
I'm going to assume it's in here to protect staff time to some degree. Somebody asks for something that's 10 hours worth of work, it's only of interest to one board member, they look at it for 30 seconds and discard it. It wasn't worth staff members' time of 10 hours to put that together.
But
The
it
same,
seems to- go ahead.
well, at the same time, I think you need the information that you need to respond. And likely, if one person has a question, likely more people have the question. And I think collectively, I guess the concept was an agreement of the board that we want to invest X amount of time, whatever X amount of time is. To Mr. Gessard's point, or even Mr. Trotta's note, we're allowing the public to direct us with 2 hours of time, free of charge. We have 30 days to do that. I would certainly think that I'd be willing to do that for any board member on the majority side or the minority side. But you might have to give me time.
That's fair. That should be expected. Or at least the staff to indicate it's going to take a little longer.
Right.
Can I have a little bit more time? And if that person isn't willing to accept that, then make them pay. But, I think any reasonable person would say, absolutely. It's going to take a little time for your staff. I'm not going to make you stop and get it right away. But I think 2 hours, if you're going to let the public have that opportunity, I think an elected board member should have that opportunity also, and courtesy.
We're talking about board members' communication processes here, not the general public.
But
And I can see protecting staff time. I don't have a problem with that. I've already said what I've heard. I don't know if it's so or not, but I would think if the board is being informed as we go along, that there'll be no need for a board member to seek information that would take an inordinate amount of time. It would seem to me. I don't know.
So Are you suggesting a change then, Mr. Gessford?
I think so. I mean, it says the individual request. It doesn't say the board member request. Maybe I'm wrong, but I would like to see, you know, a working relationship with the board and the superintendent, and I don't think we're not going to have that. I think we're going to see that consistent moving forward, and, you know, at least having a time frame on there of 2 hours, because we do allow that for someone on the outside to ask for that information, and after the 2 hours, we charge that person, and I think we should, you know, at least hold that same standard for our elected board member, present and future.
So the change you're suggesting is to change the 30 minutes to 2 hours?
I think
Any
that's
other
fair,
language?
in my opinion.
I mean, I think the concept of this too, and I'll maybe defer to Mr. Trotta, at what point does it become a board's request? Now, that becomes a different matter. You know, if it takes us 100 hours to put together the board's request, that's what we do. So I think this is to, like Mr. Gessler, you point out, this is an individual's
Individual.
request. So only 107 of you want this information for some reason. So
Right.
to have some some limit of information, but if it takes us longer than 2 hours and the board, because it looks like to me in this, it's been clearly communicated to all the board members what the request is by the board member. At the point it becomes a board request, not an individual's request, yes, I'd like to have that too. And 4 of you agree, yes, we like to have that too.
Right.
I don't think there's any charge. I don't think there's any limit amount of time, as long as that's where you want us to invest our time.
You were going to say something?
But these are communication processes for board members,
Yes,
not the general public.
correct.
And I just wanted to note that Dr. Michael's point is an excellent point, and that is, this does not apply to the body. That is, if the board decides we want this information, it doesn't matter how long it takes.
Right.
We will provide it. This is one individual board member has a request, and the board itself is actually the final decision maker on whether that request is going to be granted or not. So the way it works operationally is the superintendent would report, we received this request, we anticipate it'll take X period of time, it exceeds the threshold in the board's communication processes, should staff proceed to honor that board member's request.
I mean,
You're all
I
right with
10
2 hours?
months on the board or whatever it is, 9 months. When we've asked for information, we've received it. I mean, with no problem. I don't know what you want to do with that.
Are you opposed to changing it to 2 hours?
Well, I don't want to, I can see,
Or do you want to change
I don't
it
want
to
to burden the
something?
staff. At the same time, if there's an issue that could arise where a board member thinks he or she needs more information, then they should have it. I'm just wondering if this is the way it is, if there are limitations like this on other governing bodies.
So, I'm sorry, am I hearing you say that if an individual board member is requesting information, regardless of how much time it takes, they should be able to have that information? Is that what
I
I hear
feel
you
that
saying?
way. On the other hand, I do see the case for protecting staff time. It would turn out that they're asking for something that's very trivial. On the other hand, board members need the information. So, we got to have a balance between protecting staff time and, like I say, as has been said several times here, under the current administration, information is forthcoming quite readily from what I've seen.
But with all due respect, we don't know what's going to be in the future. you can, can assume it, and I think that we probably would see that, but you don't know.
I'm trying to think of a situation where we wouldn't have had information all along, and somebody wants information that would take hours to compile. I'm trying to think of a situation and an issue where that would be the case. And we're getting information all along. I don't know.
All right, well, three of us are in agreement that we could go with 2 hours. And we- Well, no, not whatever, are you?
We've got 3 other members that are gonna cash in,
Right, exactly.
talk about these things.
All right, so let's
we can make
make
the
the,
change,
let's
knowing
make,
that this is not gonna be formal action.
right, let's make the recommended,
Sure,
the suggested
not a problem.
change the time then from 30 minutes to 2 hours. I'm watching very closely the time here. It's 20 after 2. Okay, number 3, board members should let the superintendent know promptly about concerns of significance in the community related to the school system service or its employees. The superintendent shall share this information with all board members. Have-
Why in the retreat did someone say that this should be revisited? And
I have a firm intent, but possibly combine with others. I don't know that there's something else there that, another statement that would be aligned with.
I'm fine with that statement.
You're fine with that statement? As is? I mean, with the content, with the intent of it, I have no problem. Okay.
somebody must have had a concern about it, but maybe that person might
Well,
agree with
just that it was thought that it could be combined, so. All right, and then number 5, board member committee chairs may direct questions to staff liaisons. Board members should direct questions to the appropriate committee chair. I have revisit, clarify communication with staff. That to me is somewhat contradictory to, or in conflict with something we said earlier, which is that we should go through the superintendent with our questions. Now we're saying that we can direct questions to the staff liaison for a committee.
Well, but I'm not chair of a committee, so I've never had because I'm on 3 committees, that's the only reason I'm not a chair of a committee, I guess. But you've been chair of a committee. Gessford's been chair of a committee. Don't we quite frequently consult with Mr. Trotta about issues if we need legal
Well,
thing without going through the superintendent?
I think there are questions and there are questions. I think there are procedural types of questions that say as Finance Committee Chair, I might want to communicate with Mr. Prue about something, whether certain reports would be completed or, something along those lines, or in terms of scheduling meetings, or to ask,
Yeah, and I'd almost prefer those kind of questions be asked of the liaison. That's part of their role, and that would keep questions off my plate that I don't need to be involved in. I would expect my staff to let me know if questions have come up that I need to be aware of. So maybe this is just slightly different than a concern. Some of the other language we talked about was concern, a complaint, that type of thing. I think later on in this description, it actually talks about chief legal counsel and how the board can use chief legal counsel. What chief legal counsel is responsible to communicate directly with me, then questions asked by the board and things like that. That comes later here somewhere else, I know.
we're looking at would it be helpful to, where it says board members should direct questions to the appropriate committee chair and copy the superintendent? Or is it just, do you think that would be something that your staff would just automatically do, forward that?
I think
or
they would
copy
know
on
if
the
it's something I
reply.
need to know, but I guess maybe it's Mr. Gessford's thought there a few minutes ago. Next person might want it different, but again, this is your document, not my document, so.
And Madam President, perhaps when you examine the language in C6, perhaps that could be modified to read, staff liaison will inform the superintendent of such requests as soon as possible. And that way it would be the responsibility of that particular liaison to follow up with the superintendent. Now, some of the questions that are posed are rather general and really procedural, as you indicated. And those, I would think that the liaison would not really need to consult with the superintendent, but if it was a matter of substance or something of significance, the expectation would be that that liaison would inform the superintendent. That would be my recommendation, that perhaps you
So-
add that language.
So what would your suggestion of language be then, Mr. Trotta? And where,
Staff liaison will inform the superintendent of any such requests as soon as possible, or request.
Ms. Checkpick, do you have that? Did you be able to capture that? Colleagues? What do you think?
Good.
We good with that?
Yep.
Okay. All right, is there anything under C? Everything else I have is being affirmed. Is there anything else you want to look at? Okay. I have nothing in section D. Communications and negotiations is that section. I have a notation for number. Wait a minute. Yeah, all of E is fine. What, back up a minute.
Letter F.
Now, wait a minute. Under C, number 8. Oh, I have, okay, backing up to C. I have a note. Be sure, someone made this point, be sure to adhere to it. And that's, and the statement is speakers should refrain from using acronyms unless the acronym has been explained fully at first usage. So when we were looking at this, something that people want to make sure is given proper attention. Okay, so D, we're good. Any, I'm going to give it those a quick glance to make sure that there are no changes there. E, communication and confidentiality. So that brings us to F, communication and social media. We wanted to look at 2 for possible rewording, but we wanted to affirm the intent. Board members are required to use appropriately respectful speech in their social media posts on school system-sponsored sites and to refrain from harassing, defamatory, abusive, discriminatory, threatening, or other inappropriate communications. And I don't recall anyone saying anything other than might want to revisit the wording.
I don't see anything wrong with the wording.
Board members are
Apparently
required
this was put in by the last board.
refraining from
It applied
harassing.
then, it applies now.
Okay.
I'm fine with that
You're fine?
wording.
All right.
I'm fine with it.
And then 3, 4, and 5, we have a notation, seek guidance from legal counsel. Mr. Trotta, give us your guidance, please.
Glad to. The Board of Education in May of 2014 adopted policy GBEE, employee use of social media. And there's also an administrative regulation that supports that policy. My recollection is that the last time that this document was reviewed, which I'm looking in notation, was October 6th of 2015, that the policy was examined, the administrative regulation was examined, and the board members felt there was a need to incorporate into the communication processes basically the highlights of the policy on social media. And so that's where the wording that you see from 2, 3, 4, and 5 dovetail with what you will see in the policy and also in the administrative regulation.
Discussion? Questions, comments, any suggestions for revisions to this? Are we good with this? This, Mr. Trotta, I'll ask a question about number 3. The last sentence, board members also shall not use any logos and trademarks of WCPS or WCBOE as part of their personal social media presence without the explicit permission of the superintendent or his/her designee. Would it be appropriate or inappropriate for a member to have, as part of their, let's say, Facebook profile or Twitter profile or social media or whatever profile, member Washington County Board of Education? If it's a personal account and not something that this person is going to dedicate solely for board use or communication as a board member with constituents.
As I examine the opening paragraph of F3, it says, board members shall not, through their personal social media presence, state or imply that they are a representative of the school system or Board of Education, or mention, discuss, or reference the board, school system, or its individual schools, programs, or teams, unless the board member also states that the post is a personal communication of the board member and that the views posted are the board members alone and do not represent the view of the school system or the Board of Education. So I think that last sentence is qualified by that first sentence, that you need to make it clear that you're not acting on behalf of the board or the school system in offering comments on your personal posts, as I read
Okay,
that.
so if in fact it says member Washington County Board of Education in my profile, any post that I make, I would have to put the disclaimer, I'm not making this post as
As you're
a
not
member of the
representing,
board.
well, not representing the board.
that
It doesn't represent it's often like you'll hear these, this does not represent the personal views of channel whatever.
But that would have to accompany each and every post.
I think if to comply with what the board's internal protocols are, that would be the case.
Okay. Thank you. Any other questions for Mr. Trotta with regard to section F? Are we good with that then? No changes?
I have a thing, but I can't discuss it here because discussing it, I have to reference a personnel issue, and I can't do that.
Okay. Shekovic, is it possible for you to put what we have up there real quickly to? A4, I think we made a. And B, C2. C5. Have that one? Staff liaison did we catch that? Oh, that was 6. I'm sorry, my mistake. I'm sorry, I'm from the wrong place. Thank you. Okay. Thank you, Ms. Chadwick. Anything else with regard to communication processes?
Debbie, can you back up to number 6 again there just for a minute?
6, C6?
Yeah, I think that one, chief legal counsel to stay there. I think the phrase staff liaison will inform the
5?
superintendent goes up with number
5?
5.
That's where I
Yeah,
got it. Okay,
yeah.
thank you.
That's kind of that same sentence, only referring to staff member under number
Okay.
5, and then the chief legal counsel stays under 6 as it was originally written, I think.
Okay,
Good catch.
then I wasn't wrong.
What I talked about.
Good catch.
All right.
I'm
Thank you,
sorry.
Dr. Michael. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, staff.
Done.
Thank you, Dr. Michael. Thank you, Mr. Trotta.